Anonymous notes appeared in room 3A. Then my class started Vanishing, Reddit horror story. They say every school has its ghosts, but no one ever told me that some hauntings come not from the dead, but from secrets so sharp they cut through walls. Long before the note was found to the desk in room 3A, long before the class split like shattered glass and whispers replaced laughter, our school was like any other. A peeling building with echoes of teenage boredom, chalk dust floating in sunbeams, the muffled sound of sneakers squeaking against floors during changeovers. But something happened that winter, something that turned 3A into a place no one wanted to be alone in. Not because of a spirit, but because of what it revealed about the living. I didn't notice it at first. The shift was subtle. A few missed glances, a pause before someone answered a question, students lingering too long near windows as if waiting for something that never arrived. Our teacher, Miss Tehran, had her usual sharp bun and sharper tongue, and no one dared erupt her monologues about literature or history or how we'd all fail the national exams unless we grew brains overnight. She didn't see it. None of the adults did. But we did. And yet, no one said anything, because the thing growing between us wasn't loud, it was quiet, patient. Waiting. It started the week after the new seating chart. Alex was moved next to Dasha, Dasha next to Lena and Meek. I was moved to the desk by the radiator, far from my old crew. Far from my best friend Arson, who now sat with Eva by the back window. That's where it all started. That window. That one stupid piece of folded paper. The first time I saw it, it was half crumpled beneath the desk of Eva's seat, just visible enough to catch my eye when I leaned over to tie my shoe. It wasn't mine, and I didn't care enough to pick it up. But something about it felt wrong, like it had been placed there, not dropped, a trap waiting to be triggered. By Thursday, Eva was crying in the hallway, and Arson wouldn't look me in the eye. By Friday, 2 girls weren't speaking, a chair got knocked over, and someone's locker had its lock jammed with glue. No one mentioned the note. Not yet. But the air was different. People say that classrooms are boring places, but they forget what it's like when tension builds in silence. When you can hear the scribble of pens louder than breathing. When someone shifts in their seat and you feel 30 pairs of eyes flick like daggers. Monday came and the desk next to mine was empty. Eva didn't show up. Arson said she was sick. Dasha said her parents pulled her out. Someone else muttered something about a hospital. I didn't know who to believe. That's when the notes began appearing in other desks. Always the same writing, tight and slanted, no names, just sentences. One per note. Sometimes cruel, sometimes cryptic. She lied about what happened. He saw it and did nothing. You think your secrets are safe. At first, everyone thought it was a prank, a bored kid trying to start drama. But it didn't stop. It escalated. I remember the day someone screamed during lunch. Everyone thought there'd been a fight, but it was just Mila finding a note in her locker. One that described her old scar in such detail it could only have come from someone who'd seen it when she fell at summer camp 3 years ago. A camp none of us from 3A had attended. Or so we thought. People started locking their bags, whispering in corners. The class group chat went silent. We didn't joke anymore. No more memes. No more late-night group calls. Everyone started watching each other. Every glance was suspicious. Every smile felt like a lie. Arson stopped talking to me. Completely. He changed seats again, this time to the front, as far from me as possible. I caught him burning something behind the gym once, and though he swore it was just his math notes, I saw the edge of lined paper curl in the flames. Just like the notes, I wish I had asked him more. Pushed harder, but I didn't. Because by then, I wasn't sure I could trust him. Or anyone. By the time February came, the class had split into factions. It wasn't just the popular kids versus the outcasts anymore. It was everyone for themselves. If you had a best friend, you were a target. If you were quiet, you were suspicious. If you cried, you were guilty. And the worst part, the teachers still didn't notice. They just thought we were going through a phase. They thought the silence was maturity. They thought the tension was focus. They were wrong. The breaking point came during the chemistry quiz. It was a Wednesday, cold, gray, and dead silent. The room smelled like ammonia, and the heating barely worked. I remember my pen tapping against the desk. I remember glancing at Arson, who didn't glance back. And I remember Lena screaming when she opened her test booklet and found a note instead of questions. Just 4 words, "I know your truth." She fainted. Right there on the floor, her chair clattering to the side. Someone screamed. Someone else swore. Ms. Taryn lost it, yelling for silence, ordering us back into our seats, but no one listened. Because now it was real. It wasn't just drama. It was something else. The next day, school counselors came. So did parents. Some tried to blame social media. Others said it was hormones. But the notes didn't stop. They just got more specific. Check his phone. Luke under her bed. He deleted the messages. But not the photos. It was as if someone had hacked our entire lives. Some thought it was a teacher. Some thought it was a student who dropped out but stayed connected somehow. A few whispered about ghosts again, but no one really believed that. We knew it had to be someone among us. That's what made it worse. I started sleeping less, jumping at shadows, checking my locker 3 times a day. Then one morning there was a note on my desk. Just one sentence. You saw too much. I didn't know what it meant. Not then. But it made my stomach twist. I tried to remember what I'd seen. Who I'd seen whispering. Who I'd seen crying. Who I'd seen erasing things from their phones. But it was all a blur. A fog of fear. A blur of guilt. By the end of the week, the principal announced an investigation. Cameras would be installed. Lockers searched. Phones checked. But it didn't matter. Because that very day, all the desks in room 3A were found open and empty, except mine, and mine was a single sheet of paper, heavier than the rest. This one had a drawing. A sketch of all of us in class, every seat occupied, every face detailed. Except mine. Mine was blacked out, and below it, a new sentence. The real story hasn't started yet. I didn't tell anyone about the drawing. Not the teachers, not my parents. Not even the one friend I had left who still occasionally replied to my messages with more than a thumbs up. Because something about it felt personal. Like it wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. And deep down I knew if I brought it to light, something worse would follow. I folded the paper neatly, tucked it into a worn-out notebook I never used anymore, and shoved it to the back of my closet. But hiding the evidence didn't hide the feeling that room 3A had been turned into a stage for something twisted, and someone was directing the play from behind the curtain. The investigation did little. The cameras went up. Cheap plastic domes in every hallway and near the stairwells. But they didn't reach the inside of classrooms. The administration said it was a matter of privacy, which was ironic considering how little of that we had left. They brought in IT people to scan our school accounts, search the Wi-Fi logs, interrogate our browser histories. A few students were caught watching forbidden movies or cheating on tests, but no one was caught writing the notes, because whoever was behind them wasn't using school resources. They were smarter than that, more careful, and more connected than any of us had imagined. You see, by then the notes weren't just in room 3A. They'd spread to lockers in the arts building, under seats in the assembly hall, inside instrument cases, tucked behind bathroom mirrors. Always anonymous, always haunting. But still, the worst was reserved for our class. 3A had become a legend in whispers and half-truths. Students from other years avoided us in the halls. Teachers glanced at us with narrowed eyes. One even asked if there was something in the water. But it wasn't the water. It was us, or someone among us. And the longer it went on, the clearer it became that whoever it was, they didn't want attention. They wanted implosion, to turn us against each other. And it was working. I started keeping track. Notes, locations, reactions. I made a chart in an old sketch pad, mapping out who received what, who was absent which day, who sat where when it happened. At first it seemed random. But then I started to notice a pattern. People only received notes when they switched seats, when the seating chart was disrupted, almost as if proximity triggered exposure, like sitting in a certain place unlocked a memory, or a sin. The desk Eva had sat in, the one where the first note was found, was never reassigned. It sat empty for weeks, like a silent grave marker. Every now and then, a substitute would try to assign it to someone new, and Ms. Taryn would intervene, almost casually. "Leave that seat," she'd say, and move on like nothing happened. She never explained. I don't think she even realized she was doing it. Like she too had been pulled into the web without knowing. Around that time, Arson began acting strange. Not just distant, but paranoid. He started writing in a notebook all the time, but flipping pages quickly when anyone got too close. Once I caught a glimpse. Just a blur of names, lines drawn between them, and a single word repeated like a mantra, truth. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but the words never made it out, because deep down I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what he'd say, or what he'd accuse me of. Then came the fire alarm. It was early March, still icy outside, snow packed into gray piles along the fence. The bell blared in the middle of math class, and we all filed out, half relieved for the interruption, half frozen in dread, because false alarms had become more frequent lately, and no one was sure whether it was just bored students or something worse. This time, it wasn't false. Not exactly. When we returned to class, someone had broken into room 3A. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. But every desk was flipped, every drawer emptied, and on the whiteboard in thick red marker, a message: "You can't hide from yourself." We stood in stunned silence. Miss Taryn called the principal. The school went into a soft lockdown. But again, nothing came of it. The cameras showed nothing. No one claimed responsibility. We were told it was under control, which only made it worse. Because it wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the house like footsteps outside my door. I kept thinking about the drawing, about the blacked-out face. Mine. Why me? Why not Arson or Dasha or Lena? I hadn't done anything. At least, nothing that I thought could warrant this kind of attention. But the notes didn't care about guilt in the usual way. They cared about what was hidden. And we all had something. I remembered something then. Something small. A moment I hadn't thought about in months. The day Eva disappeared, I had walked past the back staircase, the one students weren't supposed to use, and I'd seen her. Standing there, talking to someone. I hadn't seen who. Just the edge of their backpack, the shadow of their shoulder. I dismissed it, figured it was a private conversation. But now I wondered, was that when she got her final note? The one that made her leave? Or worse? The next day, I returned to that staircase. No one was there, of course, just cold concrete and the faint smell of mop water. But I noticed something scratched into the wall. Not a note. Just a symbol, a circle with a line through it. I didn't know what it meant, but I started seeing it more often. In the bathrooms, on the underside of desks. Even once carved into the edge of a classroom doorframe. Always the same. A silent signature. I went back to my sketch pad and started adding it to the map. That's when the pattern became clear. Every place that symbol appeared had a connection to one of the notes. And not just any note. Notes that had consequences. The ones that led to confrontations, breakdowns, even transfers. Like someone was marking their kills. And whoever it was, they were playing a long game. We were pieces on a board they had memorized, and they were moving us with terrifying precision. Arson finally snapped during biology. He stood up in the middle of a lecture about cell division and shouted, "We're not blind. Why aren't you doing anything?" The teacher froze. The class went silent. Arson's hands were shaking, his eyes wild. He pointed at the ceiling, at the camera, dumb. "You think that thing's watching us? It's not. It's part of it." He was dragged out by security within minutes. Sent home. Some said suspended. Others whispered something worse. The next day, a new note appeared in his empty seat. The loudest ones are the easiest to silence. After that, no one raised their voice again, not even Miss Taryn. The class was a graveyard, a row of still bodies waiting to be exhumed. I tried to keep going, tried to act normal, but the tension was suffocating. People began avoiding eye contact. Some skipped school altogether. The administration called it flu season. But we knew better. By now, the notes weren't just revealing secrets. They were rewriting the truth. People began confessing things they hadn't done, just to get it over with. Just to stop the pressure. A girl admitted to cheating on a test she hadn't taken. A boy claimed to have stolen something he never touched. The fear of exposure was so great, it was easier to create guilt than to wait for it. I started thinking about that. About how easy it is to break someone when you know just a sliver of their past. Or when you make them believe you do. And I realized, the person behind the notes didn't have to know everything. Just enough. Enough to plant doubt. To ignite the fuse. The rest, we did ourselves. We turned on each other. We isolated, we whispered, we accused. We made their job easy. I went home that night and dug the drawing back out. Studied it again. And that's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the background, near the classroom door, was a figure. Small, faint, but unmistakable, watching from outside the room. Their face not blacked out, but unfinished. As if the artist hadn't decided who they were yet. Or didn't need to, because they were the one holding the pencil. And suddenly I knew. The final game hadn't started. Not because they were waiting, but because we hadn't given them what they needed. Not yet. But soon, I began arriving at school earlier than usual, always before the first bell, when the halls were quiet and the only sounds came from the janitor's bucket wheels and the hum of old fluorescent lights. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe another note left in haste, maybe a glimpse of the figure I'd seen in the drawing. But part of me hoped I wouldn't find anything at all. That would have been easier, but nothing about this was easy anymore. I started noticing things others overlooked. The way someone always lingered just a second longer at the door before entering room 3A. The way our group photos on the hallway walls had all been defaced. Subtly, cleverly. Only our class, always 3A. A pen scratch here, an ink blot there, until faces became blurs and eyes were blacked out. No one ever caught who did it. And no one tried to fix them. It was like we were being erased in slow motion. The turning point came the day Dasha vanished. Not dropped out, not suspended, vanished. One morning, she didn't show up, not for class, not for lunch, not even in the corridors between bells. People whispered, but no one had answers. Her bag was still in her locker, untouched. Her name was still on the attendance list. But her seat remained empty, and the longer it stayed that way, the less anyone mentioned her at all. As if silence could make her less missing. But someone remembered, because in her locker, taped to the inside of the door, was a note. A single word, next. I saw it. I shouldn't have, but I did. I was nearby when the janitor opened it with a master key, assuming it had just been jammed. He didn't even notice the note. Just sighed, closed it again, and muttered about kids being careless. I didn't tell anyone. Because I was afraid that maybe it really did mean what it said. That someone had chosen her, and now someone else would follow. I started sleeping with my phone in my hand, flashlight app ready. I taped over my laptop's webcam. I changed every password I had. Still, it wasn't enough. Because this wasn't about technology. It was about us, our relationships, our mistakes, our guilt, our silence, and silence was a weapon. One night, Arson messaged me. The first message in weeks, just 3 words, "You were right." That was it. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, waiting for more. But nothing else came. I replied, asking what he meant, where he was, what he'd seen, but no answer. The message stayed unread. I checked his socials. All blank. His last photo from weeks ago had a strange comment, "Nice mask." I didn't know what it meant. Not then, but it would come back to haunt me. The next day, room 3A was locked when I arrived. A hand-written sign taped to the door. Class relocated to Lab 2A due to maintenance. No one questioned it. We simply obeyed, like trained pets. But something felt off. The lab was cold, sterile, the desk too clean, too perfectly arranged. There were no windows, no distractions, just white walls and a clock that ticked too loudly. We sat in silence. Miss Taran wasn't there. Instead, a man in a dark blue blazer stood at the front. He didn't introduce himself, just handed out printed sheets. Not tests, not assignments, just paper. With a single instruction, write down what you've hidden. At first, we all stared, confused. A few chuckled, but no one moved. Then Mila picked up her pen, began writing. One by one, the others followed, hesitantly, nervously. Some scribbled quickly, as if desperate to get it over with. Others paused between words, their faces tight with something between shame and relief. I didn't write. I watched, waited, and saw what they didn't. The man was reading their pages as they finished. Not afterward. As they wrote, almost like he already knew what they were going to confess. When everyone was done, he collected the pages in silence, gave a short nod, and left. We never saw him again. The next day, 3 more students stopped coming to school, all from 3A. Their parents gave different reasons: illness, travel, family issues. But we knew better. Each of them had written pages that day. Each of them had looked relieved, like they'd finally handed off a burden too heavy to carry. But relief, I realized, could be a trap, because once you give up your secrets, you don't control them anymore. Someone else does. I stopped sleeping. I started drawing instead, recreating the sketch I'd found, trying to make sense of the faceless figure by the door. I tried adding details, a jawline, a hairstyle, glasses. None of it fit, because I was looking for someone real. And what if this person wasn't real at all? What if the notes didn't come from a person, but from us? Not in a supernatural way, but in something scarier. A collective fear that had become sentient. A fear that lived in the gaps between our relationships, feeding on our silence. I shared the idea with Lena, one of the few who still talked to me. She looked at me like I was losing it. Maybe I was. But then she said something I hadn't considered. What if it's not about who's writing the notes, she said, but who's reading them? That sat with me for days. Because she was right. We had given the notes their power, believed every word without question, acted on them, turned on each other because of them. We were the audience and the actors. And someone, somewhere, was watching us perform. That's when I did something I probably shouldn't have. I wrote my own note. I placed it under a random desk in a different class. Same handwriting, same tone. He's not who you think he is. The next day, the entire school was buzzing. Rumors spread like wildfire. The student who found the note thought it was about his friend. Accused him in front of everyone. A teacher had to break up the shouting match. No one knew it came from me. And that scared me more than anything, because it worked. Too easily, I had become part of it. Just like that. A silent push and the whole machine turned. I destroyed the sketch pad that night. Burned every page. Deleted the photos. I thought I could walk away. I thought I could forget. But the next morning there was a note in my locker. Not folded, not hidden, just placed openly, boldly. It said, "You learned the script, now act." I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide if it was a threat or an invitation. Or both. I didn't show anyone. Not because I wanted to protect the game, but because part of me was starting to understand it. Not agree with it, but see its shape, see its purpose. The notes weren't about punishment. They were about control, manipulation. And if I could figure out who was writing them, really writing them, could end it. Or at least stop being a pawn. That afternoon, I skipped class, hid in the supply closet next to the office. Watched who went in and out, watched who lingered at the lockers, watched who carried papers without reason. That's when I saw her. Ms. Taryn. She had a folder in her arms. Not classwork, not exams, just a thick, unmarked folder. She walked straight to the teacher's lounge, looked both ways before entering. Something about it didn't sit right. I followed, quiet as I could. Waited until the door clicked shut, then pressed my ear against it. At first, nothing. Then, the unmistakable sound of pages flipping, and then a voice, hers soft, almost rehearsed. Progress is accelerating. Behavioral responses within expected range. Isolation rate above target. I froze. She wasn't alone. Another voice replied, male, calm. I'm the catalyst. A pause. Then, he's adapting. We may need to accelerate exposure. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, thoughts racing. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't even just psychological warfare. It was a test, an experiment. We were the subjects. Room 3A wasn't cursed. It was chosen. And I was the catalyst, whatever that meant. I didn't know if I should run, tell someone, or pretend I'd heard nothing. But before I could decide, the door creaked open. And Ms. Taryn stood there, looking directly at me. Smiling. We were just talking about you. I froze. Her smile wasn't the kind teachers give when they catch you skipping class. It was too calm, too rehearsed, like she'd been expecting me. Like this was the next step in a sequence already set in motion. Behind her, the teacher's lounge looked ordinary enough. Coffee mugs, folders, a half-dead plant near the window. But I could feel it in my bones, nothing in there was ordinary. I mumbled something. An apology, maybe, or an excuse, but she simply stepped aside and gestured inward. Come in. It's time we stop pretending. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to run, to bolt down the hall and not look back, but something stronger held me in place. Curiosity, a hunger for answers. I stepped in. The door closed behind me with a soft click. The man I'd heard earlier was seated by the window, flipping through a thick binder filled with what looked like student profiles. Our student profiles. Mine lay open in front of him. My photo paperclipped to the top corner. My name highlighted. He didn't look up when he spoke. We've been monitoring your response. You're more resistant than projected. I said nothing. My pulse hammered in my throat. Ms. Taryn walked to the counter, poured herself a cup of tea as if we were discussing lesson plans, not psychological warfare. We never meant for it to affect you this way, she said casually, but once the pattern emerged, it was too valuable to ignore. I found my voice thin and dry. What is this? She turned, tea in hand, and took a sip before answering. It's a behavioral experiment. One of many. Your class was selected for observation and influence. A closed system. Contained variables. Social triggers. The notes, I asked. Planted, the man said without looking up. Some by us. Most by you, eventually. That was the point. The point. My voice cracked. To watch us fall apart. To study the architecture of collapse, he said flatly. Trust, guilt, conformity, rebellion. You don't get those dynamics in a lab. But in a classroom, with pressure, surveillance, whispers, you'd be amazed what people become. I took a step back, the room suddenly too small. You used us. Miss Tarn's expression didn't change. We guided you. The environment was the instrument. You simply played your parts. I felt sick. All the fear, the lies, the friendships destroyed, the isolation. It hadn't been coincidence, it had been engineered. And worse, we'd done most of the damage ourselves. What about Dasha? Arson. Iva. Safe, the man said. Relocated to other institutions. Their data sets are complete. You mean they're test subjects too? He replied. Until their arcs ended. Arcs. The word echoed like a slap. We weren't students to them. We were stories, graphs, points on a chart. Why me? I asked. Why make me the catalyst? Ms. Taryn finally sat, folding her hands in front of her. Because you noticed. That's what made you valuable. Most students absorb their environment without questioning it. You mapped it. Challenged it? Challenged it? That's rare. I couldn't breathe. My world tilted. Every memory from the last few months reassembled in a different light. Every betrayal, every silence, every carefully folded note. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. So what now? I asked. You erase my memory. Transfer me too. No, the man said, finally looking up. His eyes were a dull gray, cold and calculating. You've progressed beyond the observational phase. We want to offer you a choice. A choice. Participation, he said. You understand the system now. You could help us refine it. Improve it. There's more work to be done. I stared at him. You want me to help ruin more people. We want your insight. Ms. Taran said smoothly. It doesn't have to be like this. You could be part of the solution. Prevent escalation. Minimize harm. You mean sanitize it. I snapped. Make the manipulation more efficient. She didn't respond. The man reached into his folder, pulled out a sealed envelope, and slid it across the table. Take this. Read it when you're ready. It contains the terms. You have until Monday. I didn't touch it. I left the room without another word. My head spun for the rest of the day. I didn't go to my classes. I walked the perimeter of the school like a ghost, watching everyone like I was outside the simulation now. And in a way, I was. I saw the mechanics behind the smiles, the weight behind the silences. I saw who had started folding their own notes. Who watched others cry with a little too much interest. We weren't just subjects anymore. We were participants. Volunteers, even if we didn't know it. That night, I opened the envelope. Inside were two things, a typed contract and a handwritten note. The contract was what I expected, non-disclosure, access to data, a stipend, a role as a peer consultant. Sickeningly clinical. But the note chilled me more. It was written in the same handwriting as the original anonymous notes. Tight, slanted, deliberate. It said, "You've already started." I tore it in half. Then again. But the words were still burned into my brain. Because it was right. I had already started. I'd written a fake note. I'd tracked my classmates like a detective. I'd become obsessed. Complicit. That weekend I didn't sleep. I reread every message I'd saved. Every sketch I hadn't burned. I realized how far I'd drifted from who I used to be, and how close I was to becoming what they wanted. Monday came. The envelope was gone from my bag. I hadn't told anyone about it, but it vanished, replaced by a new note, hidden under my math book. Decision accepted. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, but I noticed the shift immediately. Ms. Taran smiled at me more. The hallway cameras lingered a second longer when I passed. Some students who hadn't spoken to me in months began nodding again, almost like I'd been let back in. I started noticing others like me, quiet observers, students who watched instead of acted, who seemed just a little too calm when chaos struck. Were they consultants too, or just ahead of me in the game? That's when the assignments began. Not officially, not through classwork. Through notes left in my locker, in my pencil case, once even tucked into my sandwich wrapper. Watch who sits at the back. She's hiding something in her sketchbook. He's ready to confess. I told myself I wouldn't follow through, that I'd ignore them, that I'd resist. But I didn't. Not at first. Curiosity always won. I started watching again, logging reactions, recording changes. I told myself I was gathering evidence, that I'd expose it all eventually, burn the whole system down. But with every day that passed, that goal felt further away, and a new one took its place. Understanding, control, maybe even influence. Because the truth is, once you've seen the strings, it's hard not to want to pull them. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me wondered, if the system was going to exist anyway, wasn't it better that someone like me helped shape it? That week, a new student joined our class. His name was Lev. He was quiet, polite, sat near the front, and never raised his hand. The others barely acknowledged him. But I noticed something strange. He never reacted to the notes, never flinched when names were whispered, never looked around during those awkward silences. He was immune, or worse, aware. One afternoon, I found a folded paper in my locker. No message, just a sketch, a perfect drawing of room 3A, everyone in their seats, including Lev, and next to him, in the seat I once occupied, was me. But my face wasn't blacked out anymore. It was drawn with precision, sharp lines, focused eyes, and in my hand, a pencil, drawing the whole scene from above. I stood frozen, because for the first time I realized the real twist. I hadn't escaped the system. I hadn't dismantled it. I didn't even join it, had become it. At some point, I stopped counting the days since it all began. Time in 3A didn't move like it used to. Bells rang, classes changed. Seasons shifted outside the window, but inside our classroom the air was thick and stale, like a vacuum sealed off from reality. We breathed secrets instead of oxygen. Laughter had become a relic, a fossil buried beneath glances too loaded to decipher and silences too long to dismiss. I thought I understood what was happening. I thought I had accepted my place in it. But what I didn't realize, what none of us did, was that the system didn't just run on participation. It thrived on escalation. And it was far from done. After Lev arrived, everything changed again. He didn't act like a transfer student. He didn't ask where things were a fumble with schedules or try to fit in. He observed, quietly, with the kind of stillness that isn't natural to teenagers. He sat with his hands folded on his desk, his posture perfect, his face unreadable. And people avoided him instinctively like they knew, without knowing that he wasn't one of us. I watched him, closely, waiting for a sign, a crack, anything to expose what he really was. But he gave me nothing. Until one afternoon, when the lights flickered during fourth period, a momentary glitch. The projector rebooted, students groaned, and when the lights returned, there was a note on my desk, not folded, not hidden, just placed there like a gift. I hadn't seen anyone move, no one had gotten up, and yet there it was. 3 words, "Do not resist." I looked up. Lev met my eyes for the first time, and he smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile. It wasn't friendly either. It was the smile of someone who knows how the story ends. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the library until it closed, then wandered the halls until I found myself outside room 3A again. The lights were off. The door locked, but I pressed my forehead against the glass and stared inside. The desks were neatly aligned, the whiteboard blank. But something about the stillness felt off, as if the room itself was waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that drawing again. The one with me holding the pencil, sketching the entire class. And in the dream version, I wasn't just drawing the room. I was drawing every outcome, every betrayal, every disappearance, every note, and every face was looking up at me, pleading, accusing, breaking. I woke up gasping, sweat soaked, alone. And then I realized the truth. I hadn't been given control. I'd been given responsibility. They'd made me a mirror, a chronicler, the one who watches and records and reflects, but not the one who acts, not really. And that was the real trap. The next day, the whispers began, not in our class but in the halls. Other students, other years. I heard my name spoken like a rumor, a warning. I was no longer just another student in the haunted class. I was something else, a symbol, a scapegoat, or maybe, in their eyes, a collaborator. Notes started appearing with my name. He knew all along. Why didn't he stop it? He's one of them. And the worst part, they weren't wrong. I had known. I had seen. I had even contributed, however reluctantly. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the system turning on me. Not the one the administrators had built, but the one we, the students, had sustained through fear and silence. It had grown beyond its creators. It was alive now, self-sufficient, parasitic. I tried to fight back. I wrote my own confession, printed it, anonymous, taped it to the bulletin board in the main hall. I admitted everything, that I had tracked the notes, written at least one, been invited into the core of it all, that I had failed to stop it. I signed it only with a letter X. The next morning it was gone, scrubbed clean, as if it never existed, and in its place a new note, pinned to the exact same spot. Too late. I began to unravel. Paranoia isn't a switch. It's a slow leak, dripping into your mind until every shadow hides a threat, every glance is a judgment, every silence an accusation. I saw conspiracies in spilled ink, betrayal in every whisper. I stopped speaking. I stopped eating. I stopped trusting even myself. That's when the dreams changed. They stopped being visions of the classroom and became something darker. I was always running in them. Through endless hallways, always being watched. Sometimes I was chased. Sometimes I was lured. But always I ended up in room 3A alone, empty, except for the final desk. And when I opened it, there was always a mirror inside. And I would look in. And I wouldn't recognize my own face. Then the twist came. Lev vanished. No warning. No goodbye. Just gone. His seat empty, no mention from the teachers, no note from the principal. Not even a rumor. It was as if he had never existed. I checked the records. Attendance sheets. Class photos. Yearbook files. Nothing. Wiped clean. And in his place, a new student. Her name was Mira. She had bright eyes, a soft voice, and a laugh that felt rehearsed. She made friends instantly. Everyone liked her. Too quickly. Too easily. I watched her like I had watched Lev, and I saw the signs, the stillness behind the smile, the way her eyes scanned the room when no one was looking, the way she never asked questions. One afternoon, I followed her, After school, she walked through the corridors like she belonged in every shadow. I kept my distance, at first. But when she turned down the old stairwell to the basement, stairwell locked for years, I followed, and the door opened for her. Effortlessly, I slipped in behind her, heart hammering, and what I found beneath our school was nothing short of madness. A room, a real room, lit by humming fluorescent bulbs, walls lined with monitors, footage of classrooms, hallways, offices, and in the center, a long table covered in files. Student files, mine, Arson's, Dasha's, Eva's, everyone from 3A. I stepped closer, trembling. My file was open. Pages collaged in notes, psychological profiles, response patterns, a label at the top, catalyst, pays, threes, fracture and reassembly. I didn't hear her behind me. You weren't supposed to see this, Mira said gently. I turned hard in my throat. She didn't look angry. She looked sad. Almost like she pitied me. Why? I asked. Why us? She walked past me, ran a hand along the rows of files. Because your class was ready, the bonds were weak, the secrets deep, the potential for disruption. Perfect. And me? My voice cracked. Why make me the center of it? Because you asked the right questions, she said. And because eventually you would understand. Understand what? She looked me in the eye, calm and final. That no one's innocent. Not really, and everyone breaks differently. Then she handed me a new file, sealed. My name no longer on it. Just a single word, operator co. Welcome to phase 4, she whispered. And then she walked away, her steps echoing down the hallway of wires and secrets, leaving me standing there, clutching the file, wondering whether I had been recruited or replaced. Or if, in the end, there was any difference at all. I didn't open the file right away. I carried it with me like a weight, tucked under my arm during class, zipped into the pocket of my coat when I walked home, placed gently on my desk at night like it might shatter if handled wrong. It wasn't just paper. It was a verdict. A new identity, or maybe the final confirmation that I no longer had one. The word operator stared up at me, bold and precise. I stared back, trying to figure out what they saw in me that I no longer recognized. The part that cracked, or the part that kept standing. Days passed, but I felt no closer to an answer. Around me, 3A began to shift again. The silence grew heavier. Laughter, which Mira had briefly rekindled, drained from the halls like sunlight in winter. Students began keeping their bags zipped shut at all times. More notes circulated. But something had changed. They weren't just rumors or taunts anymore. They were commands. Sit next to her tomorrow. Ask him about the file. Do not speak to anyone after lunch. And the most unsettling part, people obeyed without hesitation. It was as if the entire class had given up the idea of resisting, of questioning, and in that eerie submission, I saw what they'd been shaping us into, not just a data pool, not just a case study, but a prototype, an obedient, reactive organism, a model for something larger, something scalable. The system was done testing. Now it was replicating. I finally opened the file on a Tuesday. The sky outside was steel gray, and it smelled like snow, though none had fallen yet. Inside were 7 pages. The first was a welcome letter, cold and congratulatory. It outlined a list of new privileges, access to surveillance archives, the right to redirect behavioral experiments, the ability to suggest narrative adjustments. Narrative adjustments. That phrase sent a chill through me. The second page detailed metrics. How many reactions I had triggered, how quickly rumors spread when seeded through me, how elastic my trustworthiness had been throughout the trials. The remaining pages outlined potential future candidates for experimentation, most of them from other classes. One of the names was my younger cousin. Another was a boy I used to sit next to in first grade. They had mapped out everything. Blood ties, emotional bonds, social leverage. I closed the folder and sat in the dark, hands trembling. I realized that accepting the role wasn't about saying yes. It was about not saying no. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped saying no. That evening, I walked to school after hours. I still had a copy of the building key, lifted from the janitor's ring months ago during a fire drill. My heart thudded with every step as I descended into the basement again. I expected it to be locked. It wasn't. Inside, the monitors glowed softly. The files had been moved, the table cleared, but in the center of the room stood a new addition, a single black chair bolted to the floor, facing the largest monitor of them all. On the screen, room 3A, empty and dark, the desks lit by the faint green tint of night vision. I sat in the chair slowly, and it came alive. The screen changed. A menu appeared. Choices, scripts, trigger events. It looked like a video game, but it wasn't. It was a dashboard for shaping lives. I hovered over one option labeled Introduce Variable Betrayal. Another, Fees Reset Group Isolation. Each had percentages next to them: estimate emotional fallout, engagement rate, retention index. It was surreal, clinical, horrifying, and yet I felt something unexpected: familiarity. As if I had already seen this before. Because I had. Not like this, not so explicitly, but in pieces. In the classroom, in the notes, in the choices I'd made without realizing I'd been making them. I leaned forward and tapped history. A log appeared, every note, every student, every reaction. And there, buried deep in the logs, I found the first note ever written. Not the first received, the first generated. Time-stamped 8 months ago, planted under Eva's desk. The one that started it all. I opened the log and read its contents. This is the first note. Watch how they turn on each other. X. My heart stopped. Not because of what it said, but because of the signature. I had signed my confession with weeks ago, long after this note had appeared. But there it was. The same signature. Same stared at it, trying to make sense of the impossibility. And then I remembered the drawing. The one of me holding the pencil. Sketching the whole class. Controlling the scene from above. What if that wasn't a prediction? What if it had already happened? What if this, everything I'd lived through, wasn't the beginning of the system, but the end? And what if I had already played my part, forgotten it, been reset, and placed back into the experiment? The screen flickered. A prompt appeared. Deploy Phase 5, memory wipe. My hand recoiled from the keyboard. The cursor blinked, begging. I sat frozen. Had I done this before? Would I do it again? And what about the others? Were they like me, replayed, rescripted? Maybe Mira wasn't new. Maybe she was a former operator too. Maybe Lev was still here, just under a different name, or in a different class, or watching from somewhere above me. I stood, turned from the monitor, and walked out, back up the stairs, through the hall, past the faded photos on the wall, where 3A had already been erased from history. At home, I wrote one final note. Just a single sentence. No lies, no triggers, just truth. There was never an end, only another beginning. I folded it, walked back to school at dawn, slipped it under the desk where Eva once sat, the same desk where it all began. I knew someone would find it, eventually, and maybe, just maybe, they would choose differently. Or maybe not. Maybe the cycle would continue. Maybe that was the point. Not to fix it, but to document it, endlessly. As I turned to leave the room, I caught my reflection in the window. For a moment, it didn't look like me. The posture, the gaze, the faint smile at the corner of my lips, and I realized something. Maybe the scariest realization of all. I wasn't the protagonist of this story. I never was. I was the narrator. I was the scribe. I was the one who remembered, not the one who resisted. And narrators never get to leave the page. They only keep writing, even as the ink runs dry, even as the story restarts, even as the next student walks in, finds a folded note, opens it slowly, and reads the first line of their new reality. And somewhere in the quiet behind the classroom walls, I'll be there, watching, writing, turning the page. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.